Thank you. I'm one of the original space people myself, so it's always great to hear what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to go right into our next panel, or fireside chat, if you would. So we had some great conversations about infrastructure as a service and the role of the platform in delivering services to citizens, constituents, and our military, all of our public sector missions. We're going to continue that and take that a little bit, one step further now. I would like to, I'm just going to introduce our moderator, Sonny Hashmi with Box, and we thank them as sponsors as well, and also with ServiceNow and a couple of our folks that you will recognize. So Sonny, come on out.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you. And I'll let you introduce the rest of the panel.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Everybody still awake? Still good to go after lunch? All right, good. We're going to keep it interesting, although it's kind of hard to top the panel right before us, because it is just incredible to hear some of those stories, and it's kind of hard to come back to earth after a conversation like that, but we're going to try. So my name is Sonny Hashmi. I'm the Managing Director for Public Sector at Box. I've served several years in the federal government before joining Box about 3 years ago, and I'm super excited to introduce our panelists today. I'm going to start with Mr. Jeff Johnson, who's the VP of IT for the United States Postal Service, followed by Mr. Luke McCormack. Many of you know Luke, former CIO for the Department of Homeland Security. Prior to that, Department of Justice. Luke, thank you for joining us. And last but not least, Mr. Bob Osborn, who's the CTO for ServiceNow, a great partner of ours, as well as a great company, doing great things in federal government. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. I'm going to take a seat here. So our job is a couple things. So before I start, we have a challenge just to keep everybody awake in the room. I came up with a few terms which I call buzzword bingo. And your challenge is, in your answers today, you need to mention one of these terms at least once in this session. If you could do more than one term, you get extra credit. And these terms are blockchain, autonomous, AI, robotics, and serverless. Are we up for that challenge?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. I'm sure you got 3 or 4 ready to go from ServiceNow's perspective.
You get bonus if you string them all together in one.
Well, I think that will be the trifecta. We'll buy you a shot after this session. And for all of you who are keeping track, you got to keep us honest. If you miss a term, you got to keep us honest. And the reason why I mentioned that is because you're at CES. Obviously, it's been an incredible set of conversations the yesterday and today. And of course, when you go to the trade show, you see these terms and many others. I mean, I didn't realize in my life that I needed a smart toilet, but apparently there's a company out there that thinks that I need one. But when you actually look at these technologies, they have amazing potential and also new and emerging challenges when you apply these technologies in the public sector and the public context. So we want to explore these, but we also want to get your perspectives on how you think about your agency, your role, your mission, and the people that you work with, and how you're bringing real solutions based on these emerging concepts into the public sector. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. But before we get started, I wanted to kind of start with this question of, in your view, in your agency, and we can start with Mr. Johnson there. Where do you think what is the current state of federal IT modernization, from the context of your agency as well as in the role that you have across the federal government? Where are we? How do you describe it? And do you think we're going in the right direction? And which directions we need to correct? So you want to start, sir?
So sure, I'm happy to take that. I think the key with federal IT modernization is the ability to impact the mission for most federal agencies. And for the Postal Service, since we're funded with the sale of postage and services, it's really about making a positive impact on the financial statement. So are we able to align and prioritize the work of modernizing our systems in order to create value for our customers and create efficiencies within the workforce? We're a $70 billion company. The digital reflection of what we do with 20 scans per mail piece and the track and confirm. Anybody who uses e-commerce, you expect your tracking events to start nearly immediately. We don't have those at the post office when you hit buy. but you want to know where it is because you already purchased it. So we have to have that digital reflection. Those are the critical elements that we need to modernize first. And frankly, we've got to carry our legacy. We do payroll on legacy systems. We do a number of things on legacy systems. And we need to weigh that cost benefit and really focus on what's most important.
Just to build on that before we move on, you guys, USPS, probably one of the few agencies that has the most public-facing mission in the government, right? You guys literally work with Americans every day. As the expectations of general population change, as everybody's got apps in their pocket now, and as real-time information is flowing in and out of their lives, how is that impacting how you're thinking about those interactions in USPS?
One of the big interactions is I believe that we're a key driver in the customer experience. We're a key driver in the service of the Postal Service. So whether it's something simple like the ability to know where the mail is within the confines of the Postal Service, the customer expects to be able to know that now. That's part of the product. It's not good enough that it lands on your doorstep or in your mailbox, but you want to see the steps along the way. All the way to the applications that we're delivering with our mobile apps. We've rebranded that to be Informed Delivery, so you can really manage your experience with us through that mobile application where actually, I hope there's a bunch of people in the room that have signed up with Informed Delivery. Some of you have heard me talking about it several times.
Love my Informed Delivery.
We have a digital product where, based on the scans and the images that we take of the mail pieces, we can provide an email to subscribers of what they should expect in their mailbox today. And you get it every morning. And that's now raising the bar. It's raising that customer experience bar. So it's no longer good enough to deliver a great point of sale experience so the clerk can satisfy the customer, but there's got to be a digital reflection to that product and service. And that digital reflection is a key element in that customer experience.
That's great. So Luke, going to you, Cloud First is now 10 years old, 10 plus years old. Since Cloud first came out in 2008-9 timeframe, several new legislation policy frameworks have been put in place, from FITARA to obviously the FedRAMP establishment, and most recently Cloud Smart. What is missing in that? Obviously, you were a big part of FITARA, prior to that, Cloud First. What do you think? Do we think we have all the policy we need for agencies to modernize, or are there gaps that we still need to address?
Well, it's certainly refreshing to be able to answer these questions as a non-Fed, right? So watch out. And before we get into blockchain and what was it, autonomous AI,
robotics, serverless.
Yeah, service delivery, whatever.
You don't get credit for that one, by the way.
Let me touch on the first question you asked, because I think it's important. You asked about what's the state of IT modernization, and I'll tie it into the cloud piece. I would say my sense is it's mixed, right? You've got some very aggressive early adoption, beyond early adoption type stuff going on, everything from C2S and what's happening in the IC and some of what you heard with the Air Force, et cetera. And then you got some areas that are still kind of struggling, right? Everyone has the same issue as they had 10 years ago when this fund started, which every CIO sort of has two issues that they're wrestling with. One, how do I deliver on the promise to the citizen, to the mission? Name your mission set, whatever that is. Saving lives, or dealing with people in need, protecting the president. There's 100 of them, delivering the mail. And then how do I do that efficiently? And how do I do that securely, right? Those two things sort of, a lot of times they're competing with each other, but I think everyone has realized that the way you do that is you modernize, right? When you start to get to this new modern type of capability using these modern techniques, you can solve both those problems at the same time, right? You can faster delivery, certainly more secure. I think the verdict's out, and the bet has been won on which platform is more secure, sort of your on-prem. In most cases, we'll say, versus sort of a commercial cloud type capability. I would tell you, hands down, 100%, we do not need any more regulations in this community. I think what we need is more execution. a little bit more leeway in regards to procurement, which was talked about. I think that is still a barrier right now to adopting these types of technology, particularly the cloud technology, and the workforce issue. I think that's gotten better, right, with the direct hire capability, et cetera, to bring in some of the workforce. I love this idea about the training the folks, you know, at sort of the junior college level, et cetera, what Teresa was talking about this morning. And I actually wrote down, teenager cloud ninja is what I wrote down.
I like that.
But just think about it. It sounds crazy, but wouldn't it be cool rather than have a high schooler, working at McDonald's, they're actually doing some cloud stuff, and maybe actually doing it in a federal department. I thought that was kind of interesting, right? So
instead of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you Teenage Cloud Ninja Turtles. I like that idea. So to go back to the, just to kind of drill into that point a little bit. So you mentioned that there's no, in your view, and I agree, that I think we have plenty of policy frameworks to provide whatever top cover is needed. So then what's missing? We see some agencies do amazing things, not just with cloud, but like rethinking how to approach business problems in new ways, whether it's agile, whether it's cloud, whether it's big data, analytics, AI. Somebody was telling me that there are, I forget the number, like 40,000 bots that have been written in the federal government in different agencies so far. So somebody's doing this stuff, which is really cool. But what about that last mile? Why isn't that
I think what's missing is what I said. I'll put a finer point on it. One is the ability to acquire these goods and services at light speed, right? That's just not there for a lot of reasons we could spend the rest of the conference talking about. I think everyone knows what those are, right? And I'd like to see some digital services, so to speak, be applied to, a more leaner way to do acquisitions. And the other one is just the workforce, right? You've got to have the right kind of workforce in place and continue to evolve the workforce you have to embrace and adopt these technologies and ask for those capabilities and manage that type of environment, right? Just those two things, I think, are the two biggest barriers. I mean, there's other things in place, but look, there's a lot of stuff in place. The CIO's been empowered. They're in the room. They do have direct hire authority, although most of them aren't using it to the extent they can. The technology is out there readily available. It's on schedule, et cetera. You got to bring those two things together. And I think there's plenty of cloud first, cloud smart policy out there that is allowing the types of flexibility that you need. Funding is an issue, but it's not as much of an issue. I know there's agencies that struggle with that, particularly on the civilian side, but I don't see funding as the biggest barrier. I see these other areas that I talked about as a much larger barrier to overcome to really get the rapid acceleration. It will happen. It's just going to go at sort of the speed that unfortunately our community goes at for a period of time, and then I think it'll start to take off.
Great, thank you for that. So Bob, question for you. So about 5-6 years ago, like the initial foray, when again going back to this whole concept of cloud and as a service, there was like 3 or 4 large companies, not to name any names, but like they were like, well, especially in the infrastructure as a service side, where you're gonna have 3 or 4 players. They're all equally good. They all have strengths and weaknesses, but generally speaking, they're going to be the IaaS fabric across, and a lot of like initial work was around, instead of buying a server, let's just buy a virtual machine in the cloud and so forth. But then over the last couple of years, especially if you look at the private sector, but certainly in government as well, there's this explosion of FedRAMP approved platform and software as a service options on the table now, which are all sort of best of breed solutions that can do certain things really well. But obviously all of these solutions are designed to solve a part of the overall problem, right? So as agencies start investing in more and more of these cloud technologies on the software layer, the platform layer, and of course the infrastructure layer, how does interoperability work? How do these platforms talk to each other? What should agency decision makers ask for when we're talking to technology companies to make sure that they're future-proofing themselves in terms of vendor lock-in and data interoperability and those kind of things?
Well, I think you hit on one of the key aspects of any modernization strategy as you go forward, Sonny, and that is really the data. Teresa mentioned it this morning, it all comes back to the data. We always used to say that, right? It's all about the data. That kind of drifted into the background of the discussion as we focus more on the user experience, which is really important. When you think about it, and Jeff mentioned it, right? Increasing the user experience is really the basis for all of technology. So we walk through all the different evolutions of the different societal revolutions this morning that get us into the technology that we see today. But all of that is generated to assist humans in having outcomes that produce a better quality of life. The current technologies are no different. When we walk over to the main display of CES and you see all the AI technologies, now everybody talks about AI and I want to get some of that, right? You can't just buy that. You want to, but you have to lay the foundation. It really starts with understanding how your architecture has to be sufficiently elastic to allow you to adopt the technologies that are going to provide the platform from which you can leverage these new technologies. So in order to achieve the type of user experience that we even have in our personal lives today, right? So as you said, Sonny, and Luke, you mentioned as well, you carry around in your pocket or your purse this very powerful platform that aggregates information from a multitude of systems and presents it in these really easy to use applications that has a AI virtual assistant already built in. So we heard from Sophia this morning. How cool was that? Did she creep you out a little bit? And it was more than just the hair, right? But I kind of started to like her a little bit more as it went on, as she interjected a little bit of human traits and qualities. If you think back to Star Trek and Data, right? We saw his picture flash up on one of the screens this morning. What was endearing about Data? The concept of an android who had human-like characteristics, and you started to like Data, and you accepted what he was presenting more, right? And it's very similar when you think about the capabilities of Jarvis from the Iron Man series, particularly on TV. We have the same capability in our own AI that we carry around. We get to choose a voice that's pleasing to us so that we have a good connection, this human-like quality, so that we'll like the AI or the technology that we're interacting with. The byproduct of that is trust. We talked about that before. We heard it in an earlier panel. I think Bill Marion brought it up. The ability to trust the information that's going to be aggregated by intelligent agents and machine learning capabilities that are presented to augment human decision-making has to be trusted. There has to be a confidence level and an understanding of where the data came from, how it was architected. So our whole concept of architecting data within platforms that support delivery of these new capabilities has to be looked at a little bit differently than we viewed them in the past. Luke talked about acquisition. That's a different game. I think Bill mentioned that again in an earlier panel. Our acquisition processes in government don't readily lend themselves to putting in place something that can be agile and responsive very quickly. And that needs to be modernized along with what we're asking for and what we're seeing our customers ask for across government.
It brings an analogy to mind, which is like if you go back about 120 years, the dawn of
I wasn't here then.
If you think about the dawn of the automobile era, right? Henry Ford was not the first person to invent the automobile, right? There were automobiles production in market available in the market before him, but each automobile had to be at the time handcrafted in a bespoke way. Every carriage, every chassis, every engine was built for that one particular automobile. And actually, if you still look at pictures back, there were some really crazy designs of 8 wheels and 6 wheels and 3 doors versus 2 doors, because it was basically a bespoke industry. And the genius of Henry Ford was to turn that industry over its head so that the economies of scale could be achieved by componentizing everything. So now you had a standard chassis and a standard engine that could be fitted within a wagon or a truck and very quickly brought to market. And in order to get that to market, you had to invent brand new ways of building that technology. The assembly line had to be invented. So when you componentize a technology that was previously very expensive, very complicated, an average automobile used to take about 8 to 10 months to build because it was a bespoke exercise. And you want to convert that into faster time to market, cheaper cost. You had to rethink not just how things get put together and built, but also how they're manufactured along the way. So when we think about IT architectures today, I think if you go back 30 years, every business system was a bespoke work of art, right? It had like beautiful database schemas, and the specialized engineers had to design and build that, and very expensive, took a long time. And we're seeing this migration to componentized architectures that can be slapped together very quickly, and components can be swapped in and out. So when you look at the Uber app, which is highly regarded as a successful user experience, it's built on components from Google and Okta and multiple different microservices, and Google only has about 20% of the code. Everything else in the app is built by other companies stitched together. So when you guys think about that kind of an architecture, and Luke, going back to you and Jeff, how do you acquire these components differently? So instead of buying a system, how do you buy microservices that may solve multiple problems for you in your overall architecture? And not just acquire, but secure, manage, operate. How do you get to that new architecture?
So I think the key is, what are the elements? And it really moves from being development, the way we used to think about it, and it becomes a systems engineering problem. Doesn't mean that the art has to leave the system, right? We have beautiful stamps. It's still a forever stamp. You can send a first-class letter, right? And we've been doing this for a couple hundred years for a lot of different people. But now we think about it more as a system of components as opposed to lines of code. And when you start thinking about it as systems of reusable components and identifying what are the components that are commodity that I can use, can I stitch those together in a unique way to provide a competitive advantage? Or do I need to build something that provides a unique competitive advantage? Do I need to incentivize a certain type of behavior with the users? Because it comes down to that empowering of the workforce. It comes down to managing and wrangling the data inputs and all of the different inputs and outputs associated with these systems. So I would also challenge us to think about it less like an assembly line and less like somebody who's going to do a lot of upfront design for balancing the cycle time of each station in the line, and really think about the modern manufacturing and Lean Six Sigma, just in time, poka-yoke, the ability to mistake-proof those steps in the process, whether it's building systems or how the systems are going to be used. Those feedback loops are critically important to the iterations, and the more we can tighten up those feedback loops, the more successful we can be in delivering value.
That's a good point.
I would just, a couple things. One, on the interoperability, a lot of these environments are slinging data back and forth using microservices on the back end. That's not a secret, right? I mean, you guys are probably doing it. You guys are probably doing it as well with your products. And I think, eventually from just portability and this vendor lock-in, is certainly at the infrastructure layer, one, that's going to end up becoming software. It already is, right? Everything from the SDN network all the way up through, infrastructure as code. And it's going to be a lot easier to port that, right? It used to be impossible to move your phone from one carrier to another, and now you do it over the air, and your 9-year-old son's doing it, or daughter. So I think that becomes a no-brainer. You're always going to have this requirement for a Lego block kind of thing, because they're going to be unique organic builds that people need to do, agencies need to do, that they can't buy using a software as a service or a platform as a service. But I really think that the platform as a service and the software as a services are going to continue to mature and expand and become easier to use. And I think that a lot of the agency's needs will be used in those platforms, right? And the rest of it's going to be microservice, Lego block type stuff, using containers, et cetera. And they'll learn to use that a lot more efficiently than today. It's not that hard to do, but it's hard for them to acquire it. And again, they just don't have the mature skills right now to adopt it. But eventually they will.
That's a good point. Yeah.
That is a good point. And really, more so than interoperability, when you talk about data today, it's data harmonization. And that harmonization is the ability to bring the appropriate data into the environment, which the AI and the machine learning scripts can take advantage of that in order to present data or information with a high level of confidence to the humans as appropriate within the loop. I thought it was fascinating, the idea of getting the human out of the loop onto the loop. but then you got the human out of the loop. I think that's very appropriate for many of the things that we're referring to as robotic process automation today, perhaps a little bit incorrectly. But it's really talking about trusting the machine support to the human decision making to the point where you believe with a high level of confidence that the machine is going to have the right answer, therefore you let it answer it. And then those things that are really inherently human, we've always heard inherently governmental. We've adopted a new inherently human term for those activities and decisions that must be maintained for a variety of reasons by humans to make. And
which I would say, for the record, I think most federal employees would love to push themselves up the value chain, right, and get the robot out of the human, so to speak. So I think most, agencies would welcome that type of capability.
Agree.
I mean, it also talks back to your reskilling and workplace, bringing the skills in conversation, right? Because a large part of the federal government historically has been hired and empowered to do very tasks that frankly can be automated, right? There's a lot of people in every agency that are,
but they're very capable of doing higher order work because they know the business.
Absolutely capable of doing so much more, and they would love that challenge, love that opportunity. But reskilling that workforce and actually applying that talent to higher order, higher skill, higher order functions should be a priority for not just CIOs, but chief people officers, chief acquisition officers, chief operating officers. I think it's a huge, we do a huge disservice to so many talented people in the federal government when our processes require them to spend so much time doing things that frankly can be automated.
Look, every cabinet secretary would love to see their CIO spending more time working on the higher order work and not wrestling with the mail systems and the infrastructure environments, et cetera, and trying to keep the availability there and the cost down, et cetera. That should just be taking off the table, right? And they're working on more of a, the business enablement, again, whatever your mission is, delivering informed delivery, et cetera.
So quick question, we only got a couple minutes left, so quick answers. How do you measure success? So historically, when we started this whole IT modernization conversation, it was always about how many servers were retired, how many data centers were closed, DM&E versus OpEx expense, balancing, containing cost. In my view, those are not the right outcome metrics, right? So how do you measure success of your initiatives, your vision, in how your agency operates, how your users provide feedback?
Well, let's let the Fed start, and then we'll...
Yeah, from an IT perspective, it's about speed to value. And success is measured on, can you contribute to that speed? Is your IT person part of the solutioning? So you get a problem and solution together, as opposed to being prescribed a problem, then having to start the acquisition process after that, or being prescribed a solution, right? So are we helping lead that solutioning with the capabilities of technology? We've got a lot of talent to bring to the table.
I say success is, how many farmers did you help today, right? How many small businesses? How many grants did you issue? How many lives did you save? Name your mission, right? And you want to get to the point where the IT organization is completely stapled to that outcome.
That's good.
I think that the customer defines what success is. For us, it's assisting those customers achieve value from the technology that they're utilizing in order to achieve the mission outcomes that they're looking for in the shortest period of time at the lowest cost. So being able to do that relies upon us helping them coalesce that vision and then put a plan into place so they can achieve it.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. Really, really appreciate your comments. Hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. By the way, all except for you, both of you failed in meeting any of your buzzword bingo words. So unfortunately, we failed as a panel. But thank you anyway, and thanks for your time. Appreciate everybody's attention and partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonny.